The light is acting a little funny. We're kind of in a funky spot. The phone is charging with my computer. It's charging on the computer. And yes, we have Christmas up. But let us read chapter 28. Wednesday, January 2nd. January 2009. Does it sound insane to say I was born to be a mermaid? I mean, I used to believe surfing was the reason I was put on this planet. But now, I know I was put here to be a mermaid. I was put here to save Cam's life. I saved his life. Yesterday was probably the wildest, scariest day of my life. The short version is Cam fell off a roof into crazy tidal waters. I'll never forget the sound Nikki made when Cam fell in. If someone had told me she had just been stabbed, I would have believed it. When I finally found him, he didn't look good. I tried literally everything I could think of, but nothing worked until I remembered the words from that letter. Save him. It is of the utmost importance. You save him. You have the power to do it. Trust your instincts. Trust the water. Water is life. You have the power. Save him. It was wild. Nikki told me once about doing spells but not knowing how she did it. It never made sense to me, but I get it now. I said something I don't fully remember, and I have no idea what it meant, but I said it. Then I breathed into Cam, and he was alive. I mean, it wasn't all lame and Baywatchy where he was like, cough, cough, oh, I'm fine, let's go get a burger, but ultimately he's fine. Nellie looked at her last line. Was it inappropriate to take such a serious moment and lighten it up with some Baywatch humor? It was her journal, and she was the only one who would ever read it. Well, and maybe her children one day, like she was reading the journal of her ancestors. She was pulled from her thoughts by the buzzing of her phone. It was a text from Emma. Bring Joe and Wyatt to the meeting at my grandma's request. There were an additional 87 unread text messages, but she didn't bother with them. Instead, she tossed her phone onto the bed and stretched, standing up. She listened as the guy on the radio continued to go over the statistics regarding the damage from the tidal wave and earthquake. That's over $10 million in damages, but it could have been worse, folks. It really could have been worse. Scientists are trying to determine where the tidal wave started. In other local news, a freak lightning strike set a home on fire, though it was eventually extinguished by the tidal. Nellie turned it off, calling Joe. As she walked over to Joe's room, she knocked on the door. Come in, Joe groaned from inside. Nellie opened the door and went inside Joe's room, which was as different from Nellie's room as Joe was from Nellie. Nellie's room had a few surf posters pinned up on baby blue walls, which were otherwise barren. Joe's walls were each painted a different color: amethyst purple, lemon yellow, azure blue, and a particularly bright number Joe lovingly referred to as flamingo pink, each color just as bright and bold as she was. Every wall was plastered with posters, pictures, and all kinds of random things Joe had nailed up. An old surf fin, a couple of doorknobs, 4 different calendars from 3 different years. She had even framed a few of her favorite childhood wall scribbles, adding an empty frame right onto the wall. You're still in bed? Nellie asked, poking one of the 2 feet peeking out of Joe's sheets. I almost drowned yesterday, Joe said, her voice muffled by the covers. I get to sleep in. She pulled her feet back under the covers, also bright green and hodgepodgey. You and Wyatt need to come with me, Nellie said. She walked over to Joe's dresser and picked out some clean clothes. Wyatt can't come, Joe said. What are you talking about? Joe held up her cell phone and answered Nellie's question and tossed it to the foot of her bed before retreating back under her covers. Nellie rolled her eyes and took the phone. What am I looking for? Nellie asked, unlocking the phone. It was one of Tom's family rules regarding cell phone etiquette and safety. Everyone can unlock everyone else's phones. The girls had his password as well. Text messages. Joe rolled over, peeking out of her nest. Okay, Nellie said. She scrolled through Joe's texts. Most of them were from Joe's friends from school, asking if she was okay and talking about the tidal wave. Finally, one labeled Mrs. F popped up. It read, "Update on Wyatt. The doctors say he's going to be fine, but they want to keep him until Thursday, just to make sure we're completely out of the woods." Why didn't I get this text? Nellie glanced at the top at Joe's heap of blankets. You probably did, but you never read your messages unless you hear them come in, Joe grumbled. Come on, Nellie said, throwing the phone and clothes on the bed. We've got to get going. Go shower and I'll meet you in the kitchen in 10 minutes. Do I have to come? Joe sat up in bed. Her hair was wild, part of it glued to her face by a good night's sleep. Yes, Nellie said, and you definitely need a shower. January 2nd, 2009. I thought today would bring relief. We'd be on the other end. It'd be over. And it is, and I am, but I also feel weird. I have a million questions, and I definitely need some therapy to sort out the last 2 weeks. Are there magical therapists? Nikki sighed, closing her journal. It wasn't much of an entry, but her thoughts still felt so jumbled that there was no point in trying to get them down. She checked her clock. 11:30. They were supposed to be at Ethel's house at noon. She took a quick shower, towel-dried her hair, and threw on the only clean clothes she had, an old pair of jeans and a faded yellow submarine t-shirt, which used to be her dad's from his lighter, leaner days, as he called them. You ready to go, Cam? Nikki called through the hallway. Almost, came the call from Cam's room. There was a honk at the front of the house. Nikki ran out and waved Nellie in. Nellie turned off the truck, and she and Joe came into the house. Thanks for giving us a ride, Nikki said as the two girls entered the kitchen. My mom's working on getting a rental, but it probably won't come until tomorrow. No worries, Nellie shrugged. How did your car survive? Nikki asked, setting her bag on the counter. I ran to the cove, Nellie said. I hoped running would work out. I hoped running would work some nerves out. Did it? Nikki asked. Not really, Nellie admitted. Ready, Cam said, cheery and smiling. The drive to Ethel's house was sunny, bright, and warm, filled with the classics from the oldies station. When the four reached Ethel's house, they piled out, Nikki and Joe from the back, and Nellie and Cam from the cab. Kate greeted them as they entered the house. Merry meet you all. Kate hugged each of them in turn. This is Nellie and Joe, Nikki said. Merry meet, my dears, Kate said, hugging both girls, who smiled politely. The front room was filled with familiar faces. Of course, Ethel was there with Rochelle in the kitchen, predictably fixing something to eat. Gabby and Henry were bringing in a few extra chairs, and Emma sat on the couch. Cam and Nikki sat on either side of Emma, and Nellie quickly found a seat on the other couches across from Emma, while Joe snuggled into the love seat between couches. The five started chatting, the room filled with the tittering and laughter of gathered friends and family. Everyone is here, Kate called to the kitchen. Go ahead and sit down, Ethel called back. Kate found a seat next to Nellie. Henry stood behind Nikki, leaning against the wall. She could sense him behind her. If she would have focused on this feeling, she would have sensed him more clearly. The way his magic moved in him like a gentle stream, steady, clean, and clear. As it was, she didn't yet know to focus on the feeling. Instead, she briefly caught Henry's eye, felt blood rush to her face, and immediately turned away, inwardly reprimanding herself because the last time she had seen him, she had been a mess. She hoped he didn't remember and then decided she shouldn't care, even though she did very much. While Nikki faced her internal struggle, Ethel, Gabby, and Rochelle found seats on the extra chairs. As everyone settled, the conversation died down. Joe raised her hand, but Nellie smacked it down. This isn't school, Joe. You don't have to raise your hand. Ethel smiled and asked, What's your question, Joe? I know Wyatt and I were both asked to be here, Joe quickly said, but the hospital wanted to keep Wyatt longer. But that's not my question. It's not really a question at all. My question is basically, why am I here? I don't have any powers yet, so you were asked to come, Ethel said, because we want to hear your side of the story. Oh, said Joe. Okay. I believe the event started at a beach, Rochelle said. The Cove, Nellie corrected. I mean, that's what we call it. Were you there from the beginning? Kate asked Nellie. Yes, Nellie said. I was the first one there. Tell us what happened, Ethel said. Don't leave out a detail. Okay. Nellie took a deep breath. She told her entire story. No one asked any questions or interrupted her. When Nellie mentioned Emma falling in, but failed to include Cam, Henry coughed, but Nellie ignored him. She finished her story at the hospital where she had been reunited with Joe. Interesting, Kate said when Nellie was done. Emma, Ethel said, please tell us your part of the story. Emma picked up the story from when she had grabbed Cam and how they had run up the hill as fast as they could. She confessed how she felt bad about leaving Nikki and Nellie and how she focused on getting Cam somewhere safe. Cam had suggested the science store's roof, so they went there. Emma told the rest of the story following Nellie's lead, leaving out Cam's near-death experience. She, too, ended her story at the hospital. Nikki, Ethel said. Nikki related her part of the story. She had already written Rand about what had happened, so telling the story a second time was easy. When Nellie and I got back to Main Street, she said, I heard someone call my name. I'm not sure how I know this, but I know I only heard my name because of magic. I mean, it was complete chaos up there. There's no way I should have heard my name as clearly as I did. I forgot about that, Nellie said. You heard it too? Kate asked, looking at Nellie. Nellie nodded. Like she said, it was loud. Between the people and the water, there's no way we should have heard it. Interesting, Ethel said, clasping her hands together. What happened next? Nikki finished the events, also leaving out Cam's brush with death. I'm quite interested in Cameron's side of the story, Kate said, but let's hear from Henry first. Henry said, pausing, home. I didn't think the tidal wave was coming. Sorry, Emma, but when you spend your whole life in the ocean, he shrugged as if hoping this explained his skepticism. It's okay, Emma said. Anyway, I felt the earthquake yesterday morning and figured the tidal wave would be coming after all, Henry said. I hightailed it over to the cove. Nellie was already there, and I saw Nikki running away. I figured out pretty quickly what their plan was, and for the record, it was a very stupid plan. I wouldn't have drowned, Nellie protested. No, because you would have been crushed to death first. It would have been like getting hit by a cement wall doing 30 miles per hour, Henry said, shaking his head. One thing I'll give you credit for is you're both a lot stronger than you think you are. What are you talking about? Nellie asked. You guys weren't just holding the single wave in the cove. You were holding back the entire tide for about a mile up and down the shoreline. Also, Henry paused for a moment, it wasn't a natural wave. How do you know? Emma asked. How many natural tsunamis do you know that focus on one tiny town? What do you mean? Nellie asked. You guys were working against magic water, Henry said, his jaw set. How do you know? Nikki asked. I could feel it. It didn't feel any different than when we practiced. Majorly stronger, sure, but that's it, Nellie said, shaking her head. You practiced with magic water. Henry pointed at Nikki. Remember? Wait, so you're saying someone made the wave? Nellie said, sitting up. Tsunamis usually hit the whole coast, or at least a giant part of it. This was tactical. It was aimed only at Otter Sands. It was magically created. Someone did this on purpose? You mean, we'll get there in a moment, Ethel interrupted. Henry, please finish. Whatever spell you used was powerful, Witch. Between your spell and Nellie's focus, your hold stretched over a 2-mile span. Looking at Henry, Nikki tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. You could feel that? Henry nodded. You know how some people can tell how heavy something is by picking it up? Yeah, Nikki said, my dad's good at that. Same thing, Henry said. I've had enough practice. I can tell how much and how far. Anyway, I held the water until I was pretty sure you girls were somewhere safe. I walked back into the water and went along for the ride. He clicked his tongue. What happened after the wave hit? Ethel asked. The girls mention you saved Emma? Yeah, Henry said, glancing from Nikki to Nellie. I saw Nellie jump into the water and figured she had a good reason, so I headed over there and started circling the building. Swimming in tidal waters is a lot more difficult than swimming in the ocean. You have to watch out for debris, and the currents are insane. Takes a lot of magic to swim. I eventually saw Nellie get close to Emma, and then a car almost took her out. I knew Nellie would be fine, but it'd be virtually impossible for her to find Emma again, and Emma was losing color quick. I got her out of the water and handed her up to Nikki. Emma was out. I did a few chest compressions, and she came back pretty fast. Henry glanced at Nellie. I went back into the water to find Nellie and tell her about Emma. I also found the lady and her dog. I put them up on a close-by roof. They were fine. I met Nellie back at the roof, and Nellie asked if I would make sure Wyatt and Joe were all right. I found Joe hanging on the top of a tree with her arm around Wyatt's chest, holding him up. I took Wyatt first to the same roof I took the dog lady. I administered CPR until he came around and then turned him onto his side to let him breathe. I told the lady to make sure he stayed that way. Afterwards, I picked up Joe, dropped her off at the roof, and I told her to make sure the EMTs got a hold of Wyatt. Finally, I went back, told all of this to Nellie, and told her I'd see them later. Henry shrugged, like saving 4 people's lives, 6 if they counted Nikki and Nellie, which they did, was no big deal. I didn't want to be around when the EMT guys came and started poking and prodding. My physiology is different enough from a human's that they'd want to run more tests and eventually figure me out. Henry added by way of explanation. Thank you, Henry. Ethel smiled. Her expressed gratitude was for more than his story. Henry nodded. Ethel cleared her throat and said, Cameron, if you please. Okay, Cam said, grinning. He had been preparing for this all morning. Nikki caught Henry's eye and smiled at him as a silent, thanks for leaving Cam out of this. He raised his eyebrows and pursed his lips. Nikki understood his meaning. I want an explanation later. Nikki nodded. This went unnoticed by the rest of the room, all of whom were listening as Cam told the story of what had happened to him with full gesticulation. He, of course, left out his almost dying, but by the way he told the story, he'd had more than one close call that day. By the time he was finished, everyone was smiling, knowing much of his story had to have been one of the many exaggerated chronicles of the almost 11-year-old. Well done fighting off that shark, Kate said, shaking her fist. Cam shrugged and said, It was nothing, especially compared to the giant squid I had to defend everyone from after the shark. Nikki and Nellie exchanged glances and smiled. Well done, Ethel said. Now, Joe, we'd like to hear your side. Was Wyatt with you the whole time? Joe nodded. We'll consider this his side as well, Ethel said. Go ahead. Well, Joe started. Wyatt called me. He wanted to talk to me and Nellie somewhere private and asked if he could pick us up. I said sure and went to find Nellie, but she was already gone. Wyatt got there and asked where she was. That's when we found the note saying she was at the cove. Wyatt wanted to meet her there, but I told him Nellie said we shouldn't go by the ocean. He said that was dumb, so we went. When we got there, Joe glanced at her sister. We all argued for a while, and then Nikki told us to take Cam and run, but we all thought she was crazy. Sorry, she added, glancing at Nikki. Nikki shrugged. Fidgeting with her hair, Joe continued. Cam pointed out the ocean, which had receded a ton, and there was a tidal wave coming for us. We ran as fast as we could, me and Wyatt, I mean. Wyatt wanted to get in the car and drive away, but I said we didn't have time. We kept running, and for a little while, we were the only ones running, but as people looked at the ocean, they saw the tidal wave, and soon the whole area was full of panicking people. I don't remember everything, Joe admitted. It was all really hectic, and it kind of all blurred together. Just tell us what you remember, dear, Ethel said. I remember running and then being swept away. Wyatt was behind me. On the drive over, he told me his lungs were pretty bad after the bonfire and he wasn't supposed to run for like 2 months. Well, Wyatt was running as hard as he could and he was having a really hard time doing it. I didn't realize, anyway, the water came and somehow I found myself holding onto the top of a tree. Wyatt flew past me, but I grabbed him. I just reached out and grabbed him, Joe said, staring ahead as though she was seeing it all over again, as if she didn't really believe she had done it. He was only kind of conscious, but I was able to hold him with one arm, and I kept my other arm wrapped around the tree. I remember thinking I needed to keep his face out of the water. I don't think we were holding on for very long before Henry came. He took Wyatt and was gone for a little while, and then he grabbed me. When I saw Wyatt lying on his side, I realized he hadn't drowned. His lungs were still healing and just couldn't give him as much oxygen as he needed. Joe finished and sat quietly staring at the rug. I think you're wrong, dear, Rochelle said. What? Joe asked, looking up. I think you've got a bit of magic in you already, Rochelle said. I agree, Gabby said. It's not mature enough to manifest like Nellie's yet, but it's definitely there. Joe smiled, nodded, and looked back down. Would you like some sandwiches? Ethel asked, standing. Wait, that's it? Nellie said. What do you mean? Kate asked. You aren't going to explain anything? I mean, someone did this. It wasn't natural, Nellie said, pointing to Henry. He just told us it was magic. He said it was tactical. We need some time to process, Kate explained. To explain the events, first we needed to hear them. And now we take some time to understand them. When we understand them, we will explain any significance you haven't already figured out. Nellie looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't know how to say it. Kate went into the kitchen. If someone could bring those chairs into the dining room, Ethel said, following Kate, we'll eat in there. Gabby grabbed one chair and Rochelle took the other. Cam looked at Nikki for permission to go, and she nodded. Emma, Joe, and Nellie, who was still grumbling, followed everyone else into the kitchen. Nikki turned around and saw Henry walking around the couch. He sat down next to her. You want to tell me why we lied? Henry whispered, leaning back against the couch. We didn't lie, Nikki whispered back. We just left out part of the truth. Same thing, Henry whispered. Nikki and Henry locked eyes for a moment. Sitting up straighter, she tore her gaze from him and returned her stare to the dining room where everyone else was either seated or serving themselves. She chewed her lip and leaned back, looking at Henry again. We're meeting later to talk about what happened. What really happened, she whispered. We were going to meet at the cove, but I checked online and it's still underwater. The waters have mostly receded from the shops, but the levels are still high enough and the cove is far enough down that it's still underwater. I read it could take anywhere from a few hours to several days for the waters to completely recede to normal tidal levels. I mean, the levels seem to be on their way down, so it'll most likely be sooner rather than... Are you okay? Henry asked suddenly. What? She swallowed. You're rambling about water levels, Henry whispered, leaning closer. Nikki stumbled, suddenly very aware of Henry's knee touching hers. She adjusted her leg, picking a bit of imaginary lint off her pants. She cleared her throat and managed to squeak out, I'm fine. Henry glanced at Cam and then looked at Nikki again. You saw your little brother die and get brought back to life. More importantly, you saw him die, Witch, and you didn't have the power to save him. He said this softly, not accusatorily, but empathetically, as one who knows what it is like to have power yet be powerless. I don't understand where you're going with this, Nikki whispered back, briefly glancing at him. Her eyes burned. I just meant you've been through something pretty brutal. He moved his hand as though he wanted to comfort her, to touch her hand or wipe the tear threatening to race down her cheek. Instead, he closed his hand into a fist and rested it back on his lap and whispered, It's okay to not be okay. Nikki swallowed. I'm fine, she insisted. Meet us at the library at 5. She stood up, rubbing her eyes with her palm. As she started to walk away, she stopped and turned back to Henry. Thank you, by the way. Henry nodded. Anytime. 2 January 2009. Someone magicked the wave. The bonfire was magical, too. There was nothing natural about either disaster. Someone is doing this. But why? I haven't had a moment alone with Grandma to tell her about what I can't write about. But I don't really want to tell her without talking to Nikki and Nellie about it first. I haven't had a moment alone with them either. I did notice Nikki and Henry had a moment alone together, though. I haven't told her, of course. But I think they'd look cute together. I'd probably get a shut up and a shove for that, but still, he's not that much older than she is. What are you scribbling away over there? Nikki asked, sitting next to Emma at one of the round tables near the front of the library. Nothing, Emma said, pulling her journal up and closing it. Nikki narrowed her eyes. In the lobby area, Nellie and Joe were teaching Cam how to pop up as if he were on a surfboard. Even though they were in the library, they were being everything but quiet. Then again, the library wasn't technically open. Gabby had let them in there with the promise they'd lock up when they left. Henry wasn't there yet. I noticed, Emma said slyly, that you and Henry were getting cozy on the couch. She waggled her eyebrows. Shut up, Nikki said, shoving her friend. Well, you were. Emma's knowing grin spanned her face. I was not, Nikki insisted. I was telling him about our meeting today. He wanted to know why we left Cam out of our stories. It's not what it looked like to me, Emma said in a sing-song voice. Well, that's all it was. Nikki folded her arms. Besides, even if I wanted something more, which I don't, it couldn't happen anyway. So you have given it some thought, Nikki groaned. All I mean is he's Nellie's uncle. It would be too weird. What if we got married? I'd be one of my best friend's aunts. Nikki shook her head and frowned. Not going to happen. You don't have to marry the guy, Emma said, leaning closer. Just give him a chance. She nudged Nikki with her elbow. Drop it, Nikki said. He's not even interested. Who's not interested? Nellie asked, sitting down on Emma's other side. I'll tell you later. Emma winked. She will not because it is a non-issue, Nikki said, as in irrelevant, as in moot point, as in not happening. Is this about you and Henry making goo-goo eyes on the couch? Nellie asked. Nikki gasped. Oh my gosh. We were not, she said loudly. She checked herself, took a breath, and whispered, I told him about this meeting. We were not even that close to each other, and if we were, it was only so no one else would hear us talking about Cam. We were talking about Cam and this meeting. That was it. Nikki could feel her face burning. Sure, Nellie said. She stifled a laugh as Nikki became more flustered. To avoid getting turned into a toad or something equally horrible by her very aggravated witchy friend, Nellie turned her attention back to Joe and Cam. Joe was belly down on the ground next to Cam, pretending to paddle and then pop up to catch imaginary waves. Cam's foot kept getting caught on his way up, so he fell to his knees before he popped up. Joe adjusted his foot and gave him advice on what to try next. A memory floated across Nellie's mind as she watched them. The last time Nellie had taught someone to pop up when she and Tom had taught Joe. Joe couldn't have been older than 4. Nellie, Nikki said, reaching across the table and poking her in the shoulder. Startled back to the present, Nellie looked at Nikki. Do you think she'll tell? Nikki asked as she sat back in her seat. Who? Tell what? Nellie asked. Joe, Nikki said. She doesn't actually know what happened with Cam. You brought her to this meeting. Do you think she'll tell? Nah, Nellie said, looking back at Joe and Cam. She's cool. Besides, I don't want to keep any more secrets from her. Just as long as she doesn't tell, Nikki said. Why is it so important we don't tell anyone again? Nikki asked. Well, for one, my mom would kill me, but that's not the main reason. Which is? Nellie prompted. Which is, I want to figure out what happened, Nikki said. Kate and Ethel never explain anything. They ask us a bunch of questions and ask us to explain. We don't have anything to explain because it happened yesterday and we barely survived. And if they get time to figure out what happened, so do we. Nellie shrugged. Fair enough. A mischievous grin suddenly spread over her face. What now? Nikki said. It's your boyfriend. Nellie gestured to the front door and made a kissy face. A2, Nikki said, sighing. Good to see she's moved on from denial, Emma said to Nellie in a clinical tone. Both of you shut up or I will. Nikki made claw-like motions with her hands while she simultaneously strangled an invisible person. Right, Nellie said, smiling and rolling her eyes as she hopped up. I'll get the door. We wouldn't want you swooning on your way over. Nikki sank into her chair, muttering to herself and focusing no small bit of magic on her efforts to stop blushing. When Henry and Nellie joined Nikki and Emma at the table, Nellie took her seat back and Henry sat a chair away from Nikki. So, Henry said, slapping his hands on the tabletop, why are we lying? He drummed his fingers loudly. Nellie sighed. We're not, Henry put his hand up to stop her. Omission of details that make the truth is the same thing as a lie. I've already had this conversation with the witch. I have a name, Nikki snapped. I know, Henry said. So why are we lying? We don't know what happened, Nikki said. They're going to ask us what happened, and the truth is we don't know. And Nikki will be brutally murdered by her mother if she ever finds out, Nellie added with a cheeky smile. Very helpful, Nikki said, shooting Nellie a look. Right. Henry turned around and whistled. Joe and Cam looked over at everyone at the table, and Henry waved them over. Take a seat. As Joe sat next to Nellie and Cam settled into the seat between Henry and Nikki, Henry said, Here's the thing. I don't even know what happened. Nellie, you performed the magic. You explain it. I can't, Nellie said. I mean, she looked at Joe. You have to promise not to tell anyone about what we talked about here. Duh, Joe said, flipping back her hair. The whole let's have a secret meeting after we've already had a meeting thing tipped me off. Plus, Cam already told me. Right, Nellie said. Anyway, basically, Cam and Emma fell in. You got M, she said to Henry. I got Cam. When I handed him to Emma, he wasn't breathing. He wasn't just not breathing, Emma cut in. He was dead. No pulse, nothing. I genuinely thought that was it. Nikki put her arm around Cam, hugging him close. Yeah, a shadow passed across Nellie's face. She nodded. So his lungs were filled with water. I got a letter earlier from Kate with a message for me from your mom, who I still have lots of questions about. For the record, it would have been nice to know she's alive. Henry frowned. Before he could reply, Nellie plowed on. The message basically said I needed to save him, and I had the power to save, and something about how there is life in water, or water is life. I should have brought the letter with me. You can come and look at it if you need. Anyway, I pulled the water out because I thought that was what she meant about the power to save. It looked like I was wringing his shirt out or something, but upside down. My point is, it didn't work. Then I thought water is hydrogen and oxygen, and I figured he needed oxygen to breathe. So I focused on pulling the hydrogen gas and only leaving oxygen in there. I thought maybe the purer form would be better for him. When that also didn't work, I gave up on magic and did CPR. When I was doing one of the breaths, I suddenly knew what I was supposed to do and what I should have done all along. I told Emma to do compressions and waited for my turn to breathe. I said something in a language I've never heard before, breathed into him, and it took a second, but he was fine, Nellie finished. She shrugged. I told you, I don't know what happened. Nellie, Emma said, you forgot the light. Nellie's brow furrowed for a moment before she said, oh, right, yeah, there was this blue light all around his body while my magic was working. I could feel it moving through him, like healing him. It was wild. Henry was quiet for a few moments, stoically rubbing his jaw and watching Nellie. Then he said, do you remember your words? Honestly, it sounded made up, Nellie said. Do you remember thinking it up? Henry asked. It literally just came out, Nellie bit her lip. Have you guys been studying spells on your own? Henry asked. No, Emma and Nikki said together while Nellie shook her head. He looked at them and raised his eyebrows. Nellie put her hands up as if surrendering. I wouldn't even know where to start. Which? I studied fire magic with Gabby, like I told you before, but she hasn't taught me any spells. The one time I actually used one, she told me to wait until later, Nikki said, ignoring the fact he kept calling her witch and fighting harder to ignore the fact that she kind of liked it. What happened to you? Henry asked Cam. No shark wrestling this time, he added. I thought the shark wrestling made it sound like I wasn't really affected by the whole thing, Cam said analytically. It worked, Henry said with a small grin. Let's hear the real story. The whole thing? Just from when you fell in the water, Henry said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Well, Cam said, that lady knocked us over, and Emma and I fell in the water. I knew Emma fell in because I saw her when I was underwater. Cam was quiet for a moment. He swallowed. When I fell in, I didn't realize what was going on at first. I remember not being able to breathe, and I remember my chest hurt. Everything was a brownish green color, but I couldn't really see anything. There was a second when I saw Emma above me, and she reached for me, but we were too far apart, and a current pushed me away. I tried to swim to the surface, but I've never been a strong swimmer. I'm too small. Henry shrugged. Cam shrugged. Like being too small was a simple fact of life. I remember my leg getting caught, but I don't remember if I struggled or anything. I know everything got warm and bright, super bright, like looking into a flashlight. Cam chewed on his lip for a minute, trying to remember more. Oh, I also remember hearing some stuff. Someone was crying. Someone else touched my shoulder and told me I wasn't ready yet. Cam stared at his hands as he debated whether he would tell them the next part. The part which scared him. It had scared him more than falling in the water had. Clearing his throat, he skipped to the part where he woke up. Then I remember seeing you guys over me, and I asked where Nikki was, and she was there. Cam smiled. Nikki ruffled his hair. That's all you remember? Henry asked. Pretty much, Cam said, and pressed his lips together. Have you ever heard of the kind of magic Nellie did? Joe asked. Henry breathed loudly. Well, there are a few legends, he said, rubbing one eye. Like? Joe prodded. Doesn't really matter, Henry said, the gears in his head turning. The point is, there's only one that talks about merfolk with the power to save the dead. Usually the power of life and death is exclusively available to the faiths, and as far as I know, we don't have any faiths in the family. Faiths? Nellie asked. Different race of magical people, Henry said, waving her question away. He rubbed his brow and looked at Nellie. The main issue here is that you have that kind of power, and the Queen knew about it but didn't tell me. Sorry. Nellie blinked. Rewind. She leaned forward. Queen? My mom. Yeah, Henry said, looking at the table without seeing it. So are we... We're royal? Like crowns and ball gowns and your majesty royal? Joe asked, perking up as Nellie slouched down in her chair. Basically, Henry said. Sweet! Princesses and mermaids! Joe pumped her fist at the same time Nellie groaned. Yeah, Henry said, rubbing his eyes. Look, I have to go. But what about the water being magic? Emma asked. Someone did this. He stood up. I don't have any answers, he admitted. You know how to get a hold of me if you need. I've got some things I have to sort out. He glanced at Nikki, smiled, and left. And that is the end of chapter 28. I know that this is a little bit late, but, holidays, so I'll be back for next week.